Hello, my name is Amanda Cribley, and I have developed a speaking assessment around the theme of comparing and contrasting folk tales from different cultures. While there are many issues surrounding speaking assessments, since it is incredibly difficult to separate speaking from listening, I believe that with a thoughtful rubric and the triangulation of self-evaluation, peer evaluations, and a teacher assessment, it can be done. While also using an alternative assessment form. In this case, I've chosen an oral presentation. It also serves purposes listed here outside the general speaking assessment. Students will be graded on their speaking performance against rubric criteria, but the larger purpose of this assignment will also give them a chance to develop and practice skills that will serve them outside the classroom. For example, practicing and using technology while developing the presentation. It will also give them practice comparing and contrasting English-speaking cultural features against their L1 culture. It will also give them practice explaining these cultural connections in English, as well as provide beneficial washback to the teacher on individual student needs, as well as whether or not the classroom environment is adequately supporting student success. The objectives I've explained using the macro skills list and micro skills list presented in the book. So the micro skills that the students will display will be to produce an adequate number of lexical units or words to communicate the main ideas of their presentation to their student audience, as well as producing fluent speech at appropriate rate of delivery for an oral presentation, as well as monitor their own oral production and self-correct their perceived mistakes. The macro skills will be to convey links and connections between events and communicate such relations as focal and peripheral ideas, events and feelings, and also to generalize ideas in English. I also hope that they will be able to convey facial features, body language, and other nonverbal cues alongside their verbal language. The task itself will be to produce a 10-minute oral presentation with visual aid on a traditional folk tale from their country of origin. The folk tale plot should be summarized and key moral lessons and symbolism should be explained. The grading will be triangulated between a student self-assessment, peer evaluation, and the analytical rubric used by the teacher. And here is an example of the starting rubric the teacher would present to the class. The students would be allowed to ask for clarification on different elements of the rubric, and the rubric would be modified based on the classroom discussion and only used once the entire class had agreed it was fair for evaluations. The peer evaluations and the self-evaluations would primarily use a 1 to 5 scale, with 1 being I totally agree with the statement and 5 being I totally disagree with the statement. For the sake of clarity for the students, smiley faces are being used in lieu of actual numbers. There would be a chance at the end for students to add their own comments on things like I thought the presenter did best with, or the presenter needs to improve on. The peer evaluation will help determine teacher rating reliability as well. If the peers agree with the teacher or disagree with teachers during rating, it may mean the teacher has to do some self-reflection in terms of how they viewed the student's performance. The self-assessment is also using the 1 to 5 scale introduced with the peer evaluation, as well as a chance for the student to use their own words to add comments. This is where the majority of the washback for the teacher will come from in terms of the instructor understanding where the student has struggled in their understanding of the assignment, as well as where issues with classroom and teacher supports may have come up. It also asks the students to rate the assignment in terms of how it applies to their own individual English-speaking goals and may help the teacher prioritize future assignments and lessons. So I have prepared this assignment for a class that is approximately 90 minutes long on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings at a community center. Number of students would be roughly 20 from multi-ethnic and multicultural backgrounds, all adults, so that means that anything that the teacher has to consider in terms of the assessment and the assignment would also have to include what the student's home environment is like. Are they parents? Are they working? Etc. The fluency levels are high beginner to high intermediate. When explaining this to another instructor, I would present it as much the same way I've presented it here already. It's a performance-based assessment that, while officially evaluating a student's speaking performance, is really designed to give students a chance to begin making cultural connections and comparisons between their L1 and English, and primarily to start giving them an idea of all the nonverbal, non-grammatical, non-academic things that go alongside being fluent in a language. So this would also be a chance during the introductory lessons for the teacher to start explaining things like eye contact, things like sarcasm, more abstract comments by pointing out, for example, when the wolf lies to Little Red Riding Hood, why would she believe him? What are some things that the wolf might be doing to coax information about where she's going and who Granny is, etc., etc. How would he, would the nonverbal cues the wolf be using to make Little Red Riding Hood trust him? I think folktales have an incredible amount of potential to explain things like that to someone who might have different nonverbal expectations in their L1. So it also has the added benefit of helping the students develop skills with technology and introducing various resources they can use outside the classroom when designing their visual aid and overall presentation. It is also designed to provide the teacher with beneficial washback about their instructional methods, the classroom environment, and individual student needs. And this is just an example of introductory lessons and discussions, like I've already mentioned. During the introductory lessons, this would be the place to introduce the vocabulary of theme, moral, symbols, fairy tale, folktale, whatever the students would need to understand in terms of being able to present their own folktales. Some key ideas that could be brought up during group discussions would be how these stories changed over time. Based on these changes, what do you think is or was important to the culture at the time? And do these stories sound like anything they've heard when they were children? The assignment itself will be introduced at the end of the week on a Friday. The majority of classes earlier in the week would involve the introduction of English-based folktales and vocabulary centered around these folktales, as I already mentioned. So I believe it is crucial that this assignment not be mentioned until after the introductory lessons on folktales has taken place. I believe that to mention the assignment sooner would potentially cause student anxiety or other factors to prevent the students from absorbing the relevant information from the lessons, or perhaps cause students to begin placing emphasis on other parts of the lessons that the teacher may not anticipate. By also not mentioning the upcoming assignment during the introductory lessons, it leaves room for the teacher to adjust lessons or add more lessons to the topic of folktales until the teacher is satisfied that the students understand the concept of folktales in general before moving on to the assessment. The teacher may also decide it would be beneficial to spend more time on pair work or small group discussions on comparing and contrasting folktales between their culture and the English-speaking cultures, so that when it comes to give an oral presentation, they will have had some amount of practice in small groups already that will transfer over to larger presentation. The next week's lessons would center around introducing the different rubrics that the teacher and students will use to evaluate the performances. The students will have time to ask questions about the individual parts of the rubric, and the instructor may see fit to adjust wording to be more clear, include additional elements to the rubric, or remove elements from the rubrics according to what the class agrees on. Once all of the rubrics are agreed upon, they will be printed and distributed to the students for their reference. I believe this will also provide the students with more of a sense of agency in the assignment as well as their overall learning process. The lessons will also include examples found online of students giving presentations that resemble what the student project should look like. The teacher could also give a mini lesson on how to do an online search for these examples and other resources. There would also be other mini lessons throughout on online resources, how to do a search, examples of how to prepare a PowerPoint or another form of technology to help with the visual aid. Class time would also be set aside for the students to work on their assignments in class, as well as give the teacher a chance to work one-on-one with students on preparing their visual aids. Since the overall assessment is on student speaking skills, this gives the students a chance to practice and learn about technology and doing research in a low-stakes setting. In a sense, they can play with the resources they have available and their visual aid in a way they may not be able to in other settings, and make meaningful discoveries about the resources they have on their own, as well as ask questions in terms of technology use. The teacher can also use this opportunity to explain how the assignment is giving them skills they can use outside the classroom. And I do just want to point out that the visual aid is in no way counted for or against students in their final grade, so their understanding or use of technology will not invalidate the final assessment result. For evaluation, I believe it is very practical, given well in advance of the due date, with portion of class time each day devoted to working on the project, with scheduled check-ins with the teacher, and the mini tech lessons provided as well. There's also adequate chance for review of any directions that the students may not seem to understand as they move forward with their assignments. And again, by not introducing the assignment until the teacher is confident that all the students actually understand what a folktale is and have had practice comparing and contrasting folktales in English as well as their L1 cultures, I think that it is very practical. The reliability, the teacher rubric is presented during class and gone over with students and in fact agreed upon by students. As well as, again, triangulating it with the other two forms of assessment. I think that this is a very good control for reliability. I believe it's consequentially valid, again, especially because appropriate review and prep prior to the assignment is given. And also because different examples of oral presentations would be shown to the students, as well as having multiple folktales modeled by the teachers. This also adds to the validity. And the washback, again, a large portion of this assessment is designed to provide the teacher with crucial washback in terms of student struggles, needs, and priorities.